Hey everyone, welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 568 being recorded Thursday, December 12th. Forgot to update the date in the show notes. Yeah, we're a day late today. That's because we had a review come out that was not able to be published till this morning, and we wanted to make sure we could talk about it this week. So we'll get into that shortly. But we're glad you could join us. We normally record these on Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern time, and you can always join us at pcpro.com/live to be in the chat, be in the Discord, and participate. And then, of course, if you want to watch it on demand, if that's too late for you, no problem. Head over to pcpro.com/podcast, where you can see all the on-demand edited episodes, along with the show notes and links and picks of the week, all there for your convenience. But we're going to jump right into the show this week because Josh has to go to work. That's right. It's security update night for that poor bastard. And so we're going to have him talk about a few things that he was involved in this week, and then we're going to let him head off to work. So without further ado, let's jump into the show. So Josh, you had a really interesting conversation this week with Kevin Crewell. He's now an industry analyst and journalist. He writes for various publications. He does some research and reports at Tirias Research. And of course, the thing you guys talked about, though, was earlier in his career, he was at AMD and was involved there during the time of the K5, K6 processor days. And so you had recorded an interview with him on Monday night, and we've got that up at the site, the full 1-hour interview. We had some comments. We titled it A Short History of the K6 and K7, and a couple comments pointed out that an hour plus is not necessarily short, but I thought it was great. So just tell us without going everything into the video that you discussed, what'd you talk about with Kevin?
Sure. When I'd been into computers since high school. So in the 80s, I was pretty moderately interested. And then as I started getting along more in college, it became greater and greater interest. And, I started reading about this upcoming K6 processor that was supposed to be able to beat Intel at its own game. And it got me really interested in what was AMD and what was Intel doing and just the other options that we had out there. And plus it was also the dawn of the age of 3D. So, the Voodoo graphics boards were out, Riva TN and that were not quite there yet, but you had the Verity V1000 and the Video Logic stuff. But what got me kind of into journalism is covering the K6 when it was first released. That was, some of my very first reviews were about the K6 and motherboards and, graphics that worked or didn't work in Super 7 slots. And, but a couple of years back, I got to know Kevin Crewell and became good friends. But yeah, he worked at AMD during this time. And so we had discussion back and forth about my experiences outside of AMD and how we viewed processor in the marketplace and the experiences that we had with these products as they were released and the how Intel reacted. And so then he also gave some insight about what was happening inside AMD and what they were thinking and what their goals were and what their original aims were and the issues that they had trying to get this stuff to market. And so we talked a little bit about early AMD, how they were founded up through pretty much the release of K7. He left AMD just slightly before the K7 was released. And oddly enough, he jumped around to a couple places and then ended up at 3DFX for 2 weeks until, he knew that was really bad news and tried to get out of there as soon as possible. But, throughout the entire thing, there's a lot of interesting tidbits. Fun to think back of these products, what they meant to us as consumers and, pricing of entire systems back in the day and how they were doing things like there, was the race to get an entire system down to, $1,000 with everything you could possibly use in there. And of course, today, if you bought $1,000 PC, you'd have a pretty competent thing. But back then that was scraping the bottom of the barrel. That was the lowest stuff you could possibly get, but it was still something that they were working on. So again, he had a lot of really interesting things, especially about, sockets versus slots, how where Intel was going, where AMD, how a cadre of people wanted to go, and how eventually, economics just kind of kept them where they were in certain areas. So, go and check that out. It's about an hour long, and Jim found some interesting pictures and a couple of animated GIFs and whatnot that were interesting, and then a couple that are funny. And then at the end is some retro ads from AMD that really just kind of shows us where we came from. So it was a lot of fun. Talking to Kevin was good. He's a funny guy. So hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, and thanks so much for doing that for us, Josh. And it was very popular. I was looking. I think this might be our biggest up vote to down vote ratio on YouTube, or like to dislike. Because let's see. Oh, okay.
It was what, 226 to 2 or something like that?
Yeah, well, we got near 200 likes before we got our first dislike, I think. I see there's now 2 there. So, pretty positive. Well, that's nice.
Mostly positive.
INT Peanut doesn't like me, but that's okay.
He does not.
I don't like me either, so I don't blame him for that. Yeah, so check that out.
I remember to log in, I'll downvote too.
That's all right.
And the most downvoted video I think we've ever had on the channel is the unfortunate inclusion of my joke processor myth exposed video from like 6 years ago.
Yeah, that which it was so obviously satire that the people thinking it wasn't cost me a little bit of faith in humanity.
Yeah,
but
there's like 500 dislikes on that right away, I think.
Well, check out that interview. We have obviously it's on our YouTube channel, and we've got a link on the website as well. So that is, if you're interested in that period of AMD, it's a great discussion. Let's continue on with AMD. This is the thing we kind of had to delay. One of the things we had to delay our podcast for, which is the new graphics card. Their new, I mean, you'd call this mid-range. This is mid-range.
I don't even know what mid-range is anymore, honestly.
That's true.
I'm calling it mainstream, I guess, because it's around $200. It's 1080p.
1080p targeted. Yeah. So this is, of course, the AMD Radeon RX 5500 XT. This is their new tier of Navi graphics cards. They launched with the 5700 series earlier this year, and now Sebastian had a chance to review this new 5500 XT. So what'd you find here, Sebastian?
Well, it's a really small die. They're down to, I think it's 158 millimeters squared on this. So we're talking 7 nanometer Navi, but instead of Navi 10, as we saw with the 5700 series, it's Navi 14. This is the same GPU that I assume this is the same GPU that's in the mobile variant, the 5500M. But interestingly, apparently that has at least 24 compute units. AMD was not giving us any specs on this. That was kind of odd. Like in the call with them before this was released, I had asked for full specs. The reviewer's guide does not divulge like any more than you'd expect it to. So we're just kind of guessing. There's at least 24 CUs on the table with this GPU. 22 are enabled for this. So that could be, I know Ryan Smith at AnonTech was speculating that might just be for binning purposes, give yourself a little bit of wiggle room there and get higher production numbers out of it. But that produces 1408 streaming processors. It's just 128-bit memory, just like that 5500 for the OEM market that we talked about in October. So we had been waiting since then to see what the end user would be able to buy at retail, and it's called the XT, the RX 5500 XT. Same GPU, all the specs are the same, except it's available in an 8 gigabyte variant as well as 4 gigabytes, and the clocks are a little bit higher. Not a lot, just like 45 or 50 megahertz higher game clocks. And AMD was sampling this, but it's a partner only launch. So they were sending out, I think a lot of reviewers got the same Sapphire Pulse card that we did, which is a nice card. It's a dual fan card that's virtually silent. It's one of the quietest video cards I've ever used because it has 2 pretty big fans on it for a GPU this size, and they spin at less than 1200 RPM under load. But the interesting thing is obviously seeing what kind of performance this has, and it's kind of underwhelming. Like I was a lot more excited about this as I wrote the review yesterday after I got all the results together and made these charts, thinking this was a $159 card the whole time. Like, of course, they're launching this at the same price as the 1650 Super. I saw that in the email, so that's great. And I went back and looked at the email this morning and like, crap, it's 169 and 199. So it changed the messaging of the review a little bit. I had to do a quick rewrite for the end, but it's the performance is just a little below an RX 590. That's all you really need to know, which places it slightly above the 1650 Super, but we're talking about a frame and a half to, I think the best case was about 7.5 frames average. And that was in Far Cry 5. No, yeah, I mean, it depends on the benchmark, but I had a breakdown at the end of the results if you look at the review online, just to show you just of the 4 games that we tested at 1080 high across 3 different APIs. We had Vulkan, DirectX 10, DirectX 11, or DirectX 12, and DirectX 11, and it's just a little bit faster than that NVIDIA card. But the impressive thing to me is that it was coming close to the performance of an RX 590, but it was consuming 100 fewer watts than the RX 590. That thing is a like 300 watt power draw from the wall, and then the XT, the new 5500 XT, was pulling 200 watts, and that's almost, I mean, that's right there with the GTX 1660 and 1650 Supers. So efficient. I don't know.
Right there on terms of performance too, which, unlike the 5700, which was about the same performance as, I guess, the competing whatever that was at the time, but they're pulling
1660.
quite a bit more. No, the 5700 XT.
Oh, right, at the time, sorry.
Yeah, that's what was going against, what, the 2070 or 27 Super.
Yeah.
And wasn't that pulling significant more watts at the wall?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the results, but yeah, it was pulling a lot more. Navi 14 is,
so it's kind of interesting that this little Navi is more efficient. Again, I wonder if it's just better knowledge of TSMC 7 nanometer, or are there other things that they've done on Navi to improve that, so that it's very, very, very similar in power consumption and a little bit better performance than kind of the corresponding NVIDIA part.
I mean, look how small this is. The GPU die on here.
Yeah, that's the nice thing.
It's almost like a mobile die. Which makes sense. I mean, they could have just made this a mobile part with a little bit lower clocks, which obviously they have the mobile variant of it. But to see something like this in, I think it was Brad at PC World, might be getting this wrong, but the price of this is the only thing that's concerning to me. And I don't even know the price of this Sapphire card. I haven't reached out to them. The starting price for a bone stock version of this is $169 for the 4GB version. This one, I think, carries about a $10 premium over that. So at $179, I don't know. My enthusiasm for this was a lot higher yesterday when I was working on this than it was today, when I realized at $169, you're $10 above NVIDIA's product, but the performance is just a little bit higher, so that can help. That obviously justifies the increase. But for them to be a lot more aggressive, they could have matched the pricing of the 1650 Super and said, we have a win at the same price level. So now they're asking customers to spend more to get a little bit more, but every $10 matters when you're under $200. And there's going to be a GPU at every $5 and $10 price point down below $200 as well. So I don't know. I've gone from being really positive to less enthusiastic throughout the day as I thought about this and thought about the aftermarket boards and the price points that they're going to be at, and seeing cards over 169 when, of course, right before this launch, we've seen some price drops on NVIDIA stuff. So 1660s are now selling for $199 instead of $209 or $219. And but one of the things that hit me looking at these charts again, though, looking at 1080 high performance with these cards, the 1650, the vanilla 1650 from earlier this year, is just dreadful. It's anemic compared to the 1650 Super. And I mean, there was at least one of these tests, it was about a 40% deficit. And this is a card that only costs $10 less. They still want $149 for a GTX 1650 that, it underperforms compared to this group. It's not as fast as a 1060, which is getting pretty old at this point. And I feel like the 1650 Super was what NVIDIA absolutely had to do. Just replace the 1650, just discontinue it, drop in the Super at 149. Now they have this increased competition from AMD, where AMD could literally, depending on the game bundle, what kind of deal that is, depending on, maybe there'll be a $10 price drop down the road so it matches the 1650 Super price. But they could say we have the faster card at the same price point. And then I don't even know what the 1650 represents. It should be like a $119 card.
I saw MSI, Asus, Power Color, Sapphire, Gigabyte, AS Rock, and a Zotac as well. So they did spew out, or sorry, no, the Zotac was a different card. Right, but they did put out a lot of different kinds, and most people were of the, if this had been 149 or 159, this is not bad. It's nothing to jump up and scream and yell about, but it's a decent card at that price. But at 169, it's kind of a hard sell with what's going on right now. And only a couple of people got the 8 gigabyte model. So now we're talking $200 for this card. And from their tests, it is almost better than the 4 gig. There are a couple of specific tests where they saw a jump that, over top of the 4 gig model at 1080p. But for the most part, it was the difference between it and, say, the 1650 Super that it's going against. So you might get an extra frame or two in certain specific scenarios. I think some of them were up to 3 or 4 frames a second. It's going to cost you an extra $30 to get that, though. So in such a tight little market, the prices are kind of hard to go with. And so I'm curious if NVIDIA is just going to say, you know what? Let's just drop our prices a little bit. We've got some new stuff coming out, and just convince everyone to skip this generation of AMD as best we can.
I guess I'm not feeling as negative as you are. I think that this is a good new product for AMD. I mean, it competes with the RX 480, RX 580, a little bit faster at times, like Sebastian said, than the RX 590, which is an overclocked RX 580, which again is an overclocked RX 480. But it's a new card. It's a new chip. It's got a couple of new features. Their new drivers have the support for the what's the 2D big pixels? Scaling? Pardon?
No, turning
scaling. Yeah. Those are that's now active with the latest drivers that were just dropped today.
Yep,
this is true.
It cuts off 100 watts power, a lot of power. And not only that, but because it doesn't pull as much power, I mean, obviously board designs are going to be more simple. Heatsink designs are not going to be as robust as what we saw with the RX 480 and RX 580 and 590 at that case. And so AMD's got some more wiggle room in terms of margins with these cards that they didn't have with the RX 480 and 580 right now, because they're selling those things at rock bottom prices, and the margins have got to be absolutely nil. And again, it's 128-bit memory bus, so you've got a less expensive PCB and layout and fewer layers, and just all these things put together is it's going to be for them a better margin producing product that, pushes out the old stuff, but it's cooler running, slightly more features, and partners are going to be a lot more happy, and AMD is going to be more happy because they're going to be making money. And then also it allows them to be able to drop prices when NVIDIA eventually does that on their own, and it's not going to hurt as bad. So, it's positive. It's not, a quantum leap forward, which is unfortunate, but it's competitive and it's price competitive.
Josh, you think that just looking at AMD, is the GPU side just less aggressive in general on price? Look at what they're doing, like AMD versus Intel on the CPU side. They have more cores, better overall performance, and a lower price point. So they just destroy Intel. And you would think that part of that is because they're making this play to gain market share on the CPU side. What about GPUs? NVIDIA has a pretty big lead at this point and has for years now. So why wouldn't they want to make inroads on the GPU side by offering better performance at a much lower price and just blow NVIDIA out of the water? Or do they know that NVIDIA would just answer back because they have
I think the GPU side is again learning to walk again, because they've been in the desert for a long time and they've been kind of pushed to the side while AMD has gotten the CPU side up and running. Now that the CPU side is executing, is making money, they've got products in the pipeline that they're going to release at pretty specific times, and they've got a good roadmap. They're starting to adjust for the GPU stuff. And I think part of reason why Raja and some of the others left is that, they were trying to be aggressive. They were trying to do new things. They were trying to do the most that they could with what they had, which really wasn't much because a lot of the money and the talent and all were going to the CPU side. And so they were just kind of barely holding on. And now things are starting to move forward again, and they're going to try to be more aggressive. But I mean, they're trying to keep their partners happy. They're trying to keep their customers happy. And in between that two, we've got probably slightly higher prices than what we would expect because they need partners to make cards. And if partners don't see money coming in from the AMD side, they're not going to want to do that, or they're not going to want to spend extra time on their designs. And so I think all of that is just kind of a balancing act. And, eventually these parts will become less and less over time. I mean, within 2 months, we'll probably see a pretty decent erosion of prices for, $5 to $10. And when you're talking $200 to $160, that's a significant chunk of change overall. So yeah, I mean, they're just trying to get their footing back after being essentially absent and selling a small amount of cards after the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency stuff dropped out. So
I try to put that out of my mind. It's just something that never happened.
It did incredible things to the GPU industry. We're still recovering from that.
There are trunk loads of dusty GPUs out there that can attest to that.
At least 6 figures worth in Alan Malventano's garage. Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, because NVIDIA, because we're talking about the NVIDIA GPU as well that launched Thanksgiving week, but we had with the 7.7, the crazy 7.7 7-nanometer GPU CPU launch back in July. When the 5700 series launched, it was too expensive. I was at the event at E3, and I honestly don't believe the whole debated thing. I don't even fully understand it. But if you recall, they announced $449 and $379 as the prices. And I remember looking around, talking to people there, like, that's too expensive. And before they had done the official price reveal, they were fielding questions in one of the meetings. We had these breakout sessions, and there were a couple of product team people in the room, and they were like, oh, well, what have you heard? Because we were talking about pricing. and somebody said $399 and $349, and then two people looked at each other knowingly, and then looked back and said, "Oh, where'd you hear that? Those prices sound really good." Like, it was just kind of weird. It was like it was like dinner theater. Like, what is this? And then they announced the prices, and then subsequently announced the price drop. So, I mean, I don't even remember now if that's how it went. Like, maybe when the prices were finally announced, they were lower, like the next day at the actual E3 event. I don't recall, but they dropped at some point, and then there was this ridiculous social media nonsense that happened afterwards from AMD about it, and basically saying that they forced NVIDIA. It was implied that they forced NVIDIA to launch their super cards at a little bit higher price than they would have if they'd known AMD's true pricing. So the whole thing was just ridiculous. But it's also worth noting on AMD's side of things that twice now they've had NVIDIA slip in a new product right before a product announcement from AMD, like literally within a week or so. So the 7.7 launch was coming. Everybody knew that. So NVIDIA released the super cards on the 2nd of July. So 5 days before, here's these much higher performing cards that are basically, it was basically a price drop, because the 2060 Super was so close to a 2070 that it amounted to about $100 price drop for that card. And then the 2070 Super was pretty damn close to a 2080, but it was still at the $499 price point of the 2070, and the 2080 remained, well, it didn't remain, they discontinued it, but that was a $699 card, later to be replaced with the 2080 Super. But that came out before the Radeon launch. Then Radeon launches at a new lower price, which almost seemed like a reaction to NVIDIA launching the super cards. And since then, what we've seen is the price come down a little bit to where you could actually buy a reference 5700 today for $299. And the prices on aftermarket cards range up to the $349 that they're now selling for. So somewhere in that $300 to $320 range, you can buy one of these 5700 cards. But there's been this big gap between their older Polaris stuff and the 5700 and 5700 XT. And I was glad to see the 5700 drop a little bit. It's come down $50 now since launch. But, you know, once again, this 5500 XT comes out, and just a few days before, NVIDIA dropped a new card, the 1650 Super, and they dropped it at a lower price point. So now AMD's card looks comparatively, it looks a little weaker than it would have. I'm not saying it's weak, it's fine. It's a decent mainstream card. I gave it a gold award. Like, it consumes a lot less power than those older cards. It's still providing up to about the same level of performance. And I haven't tested overclocking headroom yet. That would be interesting to look at. But it's not a bad product by any means. But if 1650 Super didn't exist, and we were comparing this against the 1650, it would just be blowing it away. And I'm sure NVIDIA knew that. So they had to come out with this product. They upstaged AMD again by releasing it a few days before AMD's product came out. But this time, there was no surprise price drop right before the launch, and it's still $169.
Well, we've got, there might be time here, right? If they look at initial sales or they look at reception, you know, from reviewers. Yeah. But
I was pretty kind. I thought I was being diplomatic, and I didn't really bash the pricing. And I'm looking around online today, and a lot of people were saying it was overpriced.
Mm-hmm.
Gamers Nexus was mocking it, calling it an RX 480. Like 2016 called, they want their GPU back. Like, I mean, that's pretty harsh. Consumes a lot less power. It's a more efficient product, but yeah, pricing is the issue here.
All right. Well, so let's take a break here. I think, Josh, you have to run, so we can let you go now.
Okay, I can run away. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your flexibility here.
No, thank you.
Have a good night.
Yep. Take care, Josh. So we've basically been talking about it this whole time, but let's, as we've alluded to, or even explicitly said, we had the 1650 Super from NVIDIA launch just a couple days before the 5500 XT. And Sebastian has a full review of that. And in that case, it was an MSI Gaming X variant of the 1650 Super. And as I said, we've seen the performance in the charts already for the 5500 XT. But Sebastian, is there anything else that you want to say specifically about either the 1650 Super platform overall or this specific MSI Gaming X card?
I would just encourage people to look at the review. I mean, there's not a whole lot to this. One of the things I noticed that's completely tangential to any of this is that this, for an MSI Gaming X, because I've got a growing collection of these now, all year we've been getting MSI cards at NVIDIA launches, and the Gaming X variant is their higher end. It has a factory overclock. They generally have things like RGB lighting, like addressable RGB lighting around the GPU, and back plates, and just in general are a more premium product. And this is a Gaming X that's just kind of no frills, no backplate, so it's okay. I mean, I think you lose some of those extras when you're into this more budget territory, but really, as we alluded to, it just crushes the 1650, the original 1650, so soundly that it makes it seem like it doesn't make any sense as a product anymore at 149. It could absolutely be a product to directly replace the old 1050, or even it's a little bit faster than a 1050 Ti, but it really should play in that $100 to $120 space. And it's just kind of weird to me to see a $10 price difference for a massive performance difference like this.
So of the Super variants, is this the most dramatic between the initial baseline and the Super edition?
Is it the most super? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
I thought the 1660 Super was, because for $229 you were literally, well, not literally, you were almost getting a 1660 Ti, which is still a $279 card. It's so close, you might as well just call it a 1660 Ti. And you're saving $50. And with this one, it's $10 more for, I would say, like 30% better performance. So I don't know. It's kind of a toss-up between these. In the 16 series, these were huge. I thought the RTX 2060 was the biggest, just because I thought it was a big deal that for $399, suddenly you were looking at an RTX 2070. It was actually a bigger deal to get a 2070 Super because you were getting a $700 GPU for $500 at that point. That was a bigger, savings, but I don't know. We get it gets so compressed. We're down under $200 now. So it's like every $10 matters a lot. And 1650 Super is a very good, I guess we'll call it, mainstream gaming card. You plug it in, you put in any modern game at 1080 high settings, and it's going to play just fine. It depends on the game. There's some games that are a lot more demanding than others, but you're going to be consistently getting, I'd say, 45 to 60 or more frames per second on average, even at high settings. And if you back it off a little bit, I literally have everything turned on high just to make things easier for myself. And like Red Dead Redemption 2, it does not default to everything being on high. And you probably wouldn't even notice if it wasn't. Yeah. A lot of stuff is either medium and some of the things are ultra, but it's a perfectly serviceable card, a good value at $159, if we even know what value is anymore. But it seems like this is a evolving segment where it had been pretty clearly defined for a while what you got for $150, what you got for $190 or like $175, $200. And now it seems like we're a $10 price cut away from the game changing again.
All right, well, check out both those reviews, the 5500 XT and the 1650 Super. Sebastian has all the charts and data and pictures at pcpro.com. So now we're going to take a quick break to thank our sponsor this week. We'll be right back. The basics of your wardrobe, things like underwear, socks, undershirts, hoodies, and sweatpants, are important. But for so many of us, we stock these categories with bulk sales from department stores. That may save a little money up front, but you end up with clothing that gives you an inconsistent fit, isn't as comfortable as it should be, and frankly, lacks quality and needs to be replaced regularly. Mack Weldon aims to change your wardrobe for the better by replacing these throwaway items with high-quality, smartly designed essentials that are easy to shop for, comfortable to wear, and long-lasting. In fact, Mack Weldon pledges that their products will be the best-looking and most comfortable underwear, socks, shirts, undershirts, hoodies, and sweatpants you'll ever wear. Indeed, if you don't like your first pair of underwear, just let them know. You can keep the item and you'll still be issued a full refund with no questions asked. Not only do Mack Weldon essentials look and feel good, they perform well too. With features like custom engineered and silver infused breathable fabric, you'll find options that are naturally antimicrobial, adaptable for any season, and perfect for everything from working out to a day in the office to a long day of traveling. I've recently started adding Mack Weldon items to my wardrobe, and I was easily able to find the right fit and fabric for things like boxer briefs and athletic socks. But my favorite item so far is probably Mack Weldon's Ace Sweatpant, a super comfortable pair of pants with French terry fabric, a handy zipper pocket, and a tailored fit, making them great for lounging around editing PC Per videos or even running errands around town. But we want you to try out Mack Weldon for yourself, and we have a special offer for our podcast audience. For 20% off your first order, visit MackWeldon.com and use discount code PCPER at checkout. That's MackWeldon.com and discount code PCPER for 20% off your first order. Start upgrading your wardrobe today at MackWeldon.com. And we're back. Let's move on to the news. We're going to stay with GPUs for a while here, and not hardware, but drivers. AMD this week launched the latest version of its Adrenalin driver. I'm sorry, not Adrenalin. Radeon driver suite. Or it is Adrenalin. It's Radeon Adrenalin.
Yep.
2020.
Adrenalin
That's what it is,
2020.
Something, yeah.
Yes. So there's some new features, as we talked about briefly earlier. There's new integer scaling here as well, which is great. I know Sebastian likes that. But Jeremy, tell us what else can we expect from this new software and driver suite from the Radeon Group?
Well, I mean, it's the new Steam, didn't you know? They've
Everything's
literally
the new Steam.
bundled in all of your games. It will scan and detect all the various games you've got and allow you to just launch them direct from there. On the flip side, that also means that the Radeon Profiler, which you probably haven't really used much, where you could actually set the various performance settings per game, all of a sudden becomes a little more doable. But even still, if that's just a little bit too much for you, they've just got a very simple user profile when you initially set it up. I just slapped it on my, what is that, a 7950 over there. And so with literally the click of a button, you pick gamer, esports, or standard. And essentially what it does is, so if you're a gamer, virtual super resolution is already on, tessellation is AMD, set to the AMD preferred and has no tops on it. If you're esports, you don't need VSR. You can cap the tessellation to a certain point because, well, why are you using it? And then there's standard, which just essentially enables FreeSync and leaves everything else untouched. This will become interesting when we're coming up on reviewing newer AMD cards, because you're going to have to pay close attention to see which profile they did it on. Because obviously, slapping a limit on tessellation at the driver level is going to change your results compared to one that hasn't. So hopefully everyone decides to do it with just the standard profile. There's a bunch of new things along with turning it into the new Steam or Epic or Origin or whichever you like. AMD image sharpening, which we've found quite nice, is now going to work in DX11 games, which is, kind of nice. The anti-lag that we've been playing with is now backwards compatible to DX9 on legacy GPUs, which makes more sense when you think about it, because older games are being played on older cards, so it's actually kind of nice to get that included in there. Your integer display scaling as Josh was talking about, so that you can, take 2 games and bring them up significantly sharper. And this is good for a lot of the esports stuff, and for people that are really excited about Warcraft coming back again, or just people who like playing legacy stuff. The other thing is, if you want to be showing this off to friends, they've put in direct ML filters, so it'll essentially, the click of a button, sharpen and clean up any of the screenshots that you're making, or if you've recorded a section of your gameplay and want to play it back, it will make it look a little bit nicer, get rid of some of the blurring and such. And AMD Link is totally updated, so if you're one of the types that likes to stream and show people how you are when you're gaming, it's baked right in, even more so than it has been in the past. The one last thing, which is kind of interesting, I want to see how this works out. It's something called Radeon Boost, which you can choose to enable or disable. And the idea is that it will, in real time, downscale the resolution of incredibly fast moving pictures. So when you're spinning around and you're not even seeing anything for that, especially if you've got motion blur and that on, the idea being that your eyes aren't going to see a difference in the image quality, but at the same time, you're not going to see any falling behind of the card for having to render a whole bunch of stuff very quickly and then try and catch up, or seeing the actual speed of the game slow down as the GPU is desperately trying to catch up. And as you can see, it's not great for really pretty games like Rise of the Tomb Raider, but for stuff like Overwatch, where you're online and constantly moving around incredibly quickly, they're claiming some impressive boosts. So we're going to have to see how that plays out as we start benchmarking it, because like we said, it just came out yesterday, so haven't really had that much time.
And I haven't actually had a chance to use it yet, because Sebastian has all of my Radeon, all of the site's AMD GPUs. But
now it's my gym. Well, I guess you are the site owner, so I guess.
But apparently there's a sound effect in the installer. It makes like a loud boom, and some people had their speakers up and not expecting the installer to make any noise.
Okay.
I
did not have any speakers connected when I installed it. No,
the only thing on that machine was just a pair of headphones, and I was not wearing them.
So just a heads up, there might be an unexpected sound effect that's quite loud. I've seen, but otherwise,
like the one that you used at the beginning of the video last week.
Wait, which one was that?
The horn.
Oh yeah, the horns. Well, but that had a purpose. I had to get your attention.
Maybe this is a purpose too.
The purpose is calling
it's letting you
attention.
Know, get excited because Adrenalin 2020 is here. Integer scaling is here, people.
Yes.
When Scott Watson, who, if you remember, former editor-in-chief at Tech Report, he was giving the presentation to us on the call, and he got to the integer scaling part. I'm just typing into the chat because you have a chat to ask questions. We were all muted. So I'm like, yes, integer scaling! Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. And he started looking down and he's just like, yeah, I'm excited too. But I at least got him to stop. I got him distracted. But I enabled it, and I will say, like, it's not just for legacy stuff. It's for, like, what DLSS tries to do. The thing that Sapphire does with their Tricks boost, where you literally just a combination of Radeon image scaling and upsampling, where you actually render the game at a lower resolution like DLSS does, and then upscale it to your monitor's resolution and apply, in the case of DLSS, it's applying AI magic to upscale it without appreciable quality loss, which is debatable, of course. And then in the case of what Sapphire does with Tricks Boost, they just render it at a lower resolution, upscale it, use Radeon image sharpening along the way to make it look better before it's output to your monitor's native resolution. So frame rates are a lot higher, and it doesn't look that bad. Really, it's very close, especially like if things in motion, you don't notice it as much as you would in a screenshot. But with integer scaling, I was running 1080p game testing on just a native 2560 by 1440 panel. And normally that's a blurry mess. It's an interpolated, blurry, smeared mess. I hate looking at it, but my monitor does not have that like 1-to-1 pixel scaling option where you just get like a little centered image. So I have to look at this full blurry screen when I'm using any non-native resolution on any of these monitors here. And you check the integer scaling option, and it just instantly looked a little bit clearer, a little bit sharper, even running 1080 on a 1440 monitor for some benchmarking. So I noticed that text was clearer in the menus. Just it does make a big difference. I have no idea if there's any kind of overhead or performance impact to this whatsoever to use the GPU scaling versus your monitor scaling. So I didn't enable this for any of the benchmarks I just ran. But
they
just
claim
for my...
they claim no performance hit.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, we can test
yeah.
that. I would always leave it on. Like I loved the way it looked. I tried it just briefly after NVIDIA added it, and now that AMD has it too, I'm like, this is great. Everybody should have integer scaling, and of course, Intel even has integer scaling, but you have to get the Gen 11 graphics for that.
That is true. Yeah, but good to see all three graphics or companies solutions having an option there now.
Finally.
Yeah. And the continued evolution of AMD's software and drivers. And NVIDIA had they kind of were the controversially at times, but they offered the most comprehensive driver and software solution for a long time. And AMD with Adrenalin and has over the last couple of years brought a lot of features in, brought a lot of performance improvements in, and we're seeing Intel now too as they prep for their discrete graphics solutions, really paying attention to software and drivers. So
and I guess not so surprisingly, the Intel side looks quite a bit like what AMD is currently doing, but
yeah, it does. It does.
Some of the team has gone over to Intel, so that's not a huge surprise. But I think the Adrenalin stuff is at this point, and I haven't drilled down into settings and stuff in the NVIDIA drivers in a while. I don't ever install Force Experience for any of these systems. I just install the driver. It's still, it looks a little dated going around in there. Some of the settings, I know that they've made some adjustments because in response to things like Radeon anti-lag, they were making it a little bit more obvious how to go in and enable that feature in their software. But running the Radeon stuff, it's really made for like a beginner. You could have never used graphics software before. You go in, you click on like display or global settings, and then there's these big check boxes you just click on to turn things on or off, like turning on integer scaling, for example. It's just a big clear switch, and it's very intuitive, and I think that it's a really polished, slick looking application. So that, coupled with the fact that AMD has been releasing drivers at the same cadence that NVIDIA has all year. We get the emails like new GeForce driver, and then there's also a new Radeon driver, like the Game 1 new game releases. So it seems almost like it's at parity now. And we've seen some little issues here and there from both companies. It seems like the ones that get more publicity are maybe NVIDIA's, and of course they will offer a hot fix usually within a day or two. But the support for desktop graphics from AMD seems to be very good now.
Let's move on to the next news story. We've got some news from Intel. As we know, they've been struggling with supply issues. They've been struggling with just production development issues. So one option, and I'm going to preface this by saying this is probably not going to be a solution that we're going to care about as enthusiasts. This is not something they're going to be targeting at the DIY market. This is going to be a product that is going into like the high volume business stuff. And what we're talking about, of course, is the continued production of Haswell based Pentium processors. And tell us, Jeremy, what's going on with this and Intel?
Yeah, the G3420 is going to continue to be made and sold. And I don't know how to feel about that, because if they were going to try and sell that to me in a business computer, I would probably throw it at them.
Well, most business users aren't going to even know. I mean, they're never going to open their computer. They don't care.
Fair, but they rely on somebody to be purchasing this year's model of machines.
Sure.
Okay,
So, yeah.
we can be as diplomatic as we want about this, but ultimately, I think because they obviously have produced Skylake based low power, low cost Pentium parts, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
So at this point, offering a Haswell part when Skylake is 3 years old, I mean, maybe you don't know what's under the hood, but why, if I'm in an IT department, why would I want to put fourth generation core technology into somebody's new desktop?
Because Intel can
When-
ship this to you next week.
I know that's the
And you've
Instead of
been
problem.
next
told
month.
by procurement you're not allowed to get Ryzen based.
Yeah.
Right, you can't get
AMD is
Ryzen,
remote and it
but we
has
don't
to
have
be
any Skylake for you, so here's Haswell.
We got these
Yeah.
boxes in the back you might like, mate. Here, just let us break them out for you.
Yep. 22
Now,
nanometer.
I would get one of
Haswell.
these for $20, but if this is still going to be slotted in at the like $40 to $60 price point that they've had these like business oriented Pentiums at, then that would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the. I guess I'll have to
interesting
look at the trade
solution.
price of this thing.
But I mean, that's because
It's an
Intel right
interesting
now.
solution to a bizarre problem. So
Yes.
it's probably the thing that they had sitting around that they're like, you know what? What can we ship in bulk?
Mhm.
Well, I got those.
Is 22 nanometers still up and running?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, must be somewhere.
Because I know they'd gone back to 22 nanometer for at least one of their like lesser chipsets. I know that was big news earlier in the year, or maybe late last year. And I don't know. But Haswell was a long time ago. I had a Haswell
Yes, it
system
was.
when I first started writing articles for PC Per.
Yeah.
In
But
2014.
I mean, because you look at, as Jeremy was saying, Intel's got two major problems in the desktop right now. They're being outperformed. They just on a pure performance technology basis, AMD is outperforming them, and it looks like that's going to continue for at least another year.
Yeah.
I mean, well, continue in the sense that AMD has a great roadmap right now, whereas Intel's kind of stalled for 12 months at least. And then on the other side of that, there's just the supply. Like we've seen hardware manufacturers, or hardware OEMs like Dell, HP, publicly blaming their lower performance on their lack of ability to acquire Intel chips. So so it's not just consumers; it's the big OEMs. They're saying, "Hey, our revenue's down this quarter because Intel couldn't fulfill all of our demand." So what can you
Couldn't
do?
this have been spun a little bit better? Instead of saying we're going to like, was this an announcement or did somebody just find this Haswell news?
I think somebody found it, but then Intel did comment on it.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
'Cause if
Intel's
they had-
definitely commented on it.
Yeah.
If they had just spun it as we're offering a highly optimized variant of one of our most popular products from the past for, specifically for whatever application, like business, industrial, whatever, it would probably sound a lot better. Rebrand it, give it a new name so it doesn't have a 4000 series product name.
Yeah, but that would last about 5 minutes, and then somebody would figure out exactly what it was, and then there'd be another PR black eye.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To say, look, we don't need anything better than 22 nanometer for this application. There's no appreciable benefit to it. Okay. But what does that say about your Skylake architecture then? And since then,
It's very
we've had
rare.
what
It's rarefied.
yeah, we've had these refinements to Skylake. Because remember, Skylake was 6th gen. So then we had Kaby Lake.
Yep.
And that was 7th gen, but it was just sort of an optimized version of Skylake. And then we had Coffee Lake, which was just another refresh of Skylake again. And then the 9th gen is again just another refresh, higher clock speeds. They offered some different configurations of higher core counts, but I don't know.
And Comet Lake is not going to be any different.
Mm-hmm.
No, but at least that has higher core counts in there. I mean, we can talk about security and hyperthreading, but they are going to be offering hyperthreading across the board, it sounds like Core i5's 6-core hyperthreaded part, which, just a year or so ago, that was an i7 8700K.
Mm-hmm.
So
competition.
Yeah, and you wouldn't see a 10-core in the i7s or i9s.
No, and that's going to be desktop 10-core 20-thread in probably in early 2020, which is exciting. You can just, if you don't care about processor architecture then if you're just looking at the clock speed and the core count, it's going to be exciting to see the same PCs shipping with what look to be much faster CPUs, or going to retail and saying, how much can $300 buy me? Oh, well, on AMD's side, I can get an 8-core part, and then for a little bit more, I can get this Intel part that has 10 cores. And if they're smart, they'll bridge the gap between what AMD has at 8 cores and what AMD offers at 12 cores. So I would expect.
And if they're really smart, they'll chop the motherboard prices.
Well,
yeah. I mean, that's
maybe.
really what.
Well,
that's
can't
where we're
undercut
at.
them on Ryzen. Let's undercut them on the 480 or the 580. Yeah, it's not a horrible idea, but that'll be, like you say, April or May next year before we really know for sure. Although the rumors are going to be spreading anytime now.
There's what's the saying? There's no bad products, just bad price points.
Yeah, there you go.
Although I guess
I love Haswell.
There are probably
I think it's
objectively
great.
bad products out there, but
Yeah, maybe.
yeah. So, and that's if it, Intel's we've seen with the highest end AMD parts this generation, the 3950X, the Threadrippers that we've seen so far. If you can find one, I mean, that's AMD's big issue is availability. But if you can find them, Intel has no answer. There are some workloads, AVX 512 stuff, obviously, that yeah, sure, you go there, but that's highly specialized. For the majority of consumers, AMD is your best bet. And Intel has already started that price war with HEDT and Cascade Lake X, and they're going to have to continue it more aggressively in the mainstream desktop.
I thought it was really interesting to look from an historical perspective at that interview that Josh did, and with it's
Kevin.
Crewell, right? I always look
Crewell.
at the last name and I
Crewell.
think it's Crewell. It's
Yeah.
Crewell, Kevin Crewell. And he was talking about AMD when they were at this point where they had acquired ATI, they couldn't manage as much debt as they were trying to leverage, and they just had to spin off their fab, and it became Global Foundries. And it took them a while because their next architecture was a failure. Bulldozer was a failure. And moving on, when they came out with Zen, like to completely turn the CPU side of the company around, took time, obviously. But it seems like they can be more focused on design and work with their partner at TSMC to get the products realized and work with them on hitting the clocks that they want and working on yields with them, with their partner, instead of what Intel is doing. They have the design, but they have not been able to build up their 10 nanometer production to any kind of scale and they are not getting the performance they would like out of it. I'm sure they could release 10 nanometer products right now at like 2 gigahertz. No problem. The problem is if you don't have much of an IPC gain and the clocks are lower, then how can you release, like we're talking about desktop here, how would you release a desktop part with lower performance than last generation? So they need higher clocks. Well, I mean, yeah, but they have a Haswell again. I mean, really hasn't gone anywhere. But it's like Jim was saying, their hands are tied right now. They're trying to get 10 nanometer going, and they're already up to 10 plus now, but it's not in any volume. How is it that this transition from 14 to 10 is now on generation 2, 10 nanometer, the 10 plus, and they're talking 10 plus plus next year on any roadmaps that we're seeing now? That was one of the big points of discussion this last week, was this Intel roadmap, where they're like, you know what, we're getting aggressive, and every 2-year cadence now, it's going to be 7 down to 5 down to 3 and 1.5. Like, where is this coming from? A company that cannot get 10 nanometer going is showing partners that every 2 years we're going to make that big generational leap. The TikTok is back. It seems
people like being lied to nowadays.
Yeah. It was another moment from that Crewell interview, and you've got to watch that. That's great. I've watched it twice already, and I love computer history anyway, so I'm just like listening to it and catching things I missed the first time. But when he was talking about, as an analyst, being in an analyst meeting with Intel years ago in the Pentium 4 era, and they had reached 4 gigahertz, and they were telling these analysts in the room, we're going to be at 6 gigahertz. And I think he told them he was either going to be in 1 year or the next 2 years. And Kevin was just like, no, you're not. And he was arguing with them like, no, yes, we are. I was like, no, you're not. And of course they weren't.
Mhm.
It's great to say that you could have. They abandoned that architecture. And he talks about, where the core architecture came from. And it was a different team that had developed that and basically saved them because it was a dead end architecture. It was too hot and it didn't scale properly. Like you could throw more gigahertz at it, but it still was underperforming. And think about how impressive the performance of the Athlon XP was at that time.
Mm.
So it just seems preposterous to me to think that they're completely right the ship and get right back on course. And then every 2 years, we're going to have another generational leap like that.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well,
maybe
and
it's
I'll
all right
say-
around the corner.
I mean, I'm going to say this knowing that this is a contentious issue amongst part of the community, but I mean, I hope they do. I do not want AMD to become the dominant only option for high performance desktop processors. I don't want any single company to do that because while
Nope.
you can argue that maybe AMD's leadership, especially right now, wouldn't play dirty like Intel has done in the past, you don't want a monopoly. You want them at each other's throats, beating the crap out of each other to win our dollars because that's when we win. It was funny too. Another line I heard from the Kevin interview, Kevin Crewell, was that, and it was funny because he said, "Well, the marketing between these two companies back, 20 years ago, man, we're right now we're in a kindler, gentler era of competition." I think was the quote. It was like, "Oh wow."
Yeah, he said the gloves were always off back then.
Yeah.
Like it was.
Oh, God,
they were
yeah.
pretty ugly. But
And so,
I
putting
wasn't
things in
around for that.
perspective. Yeah. But
Sabotaging each other's product launches or even just events.
mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he was talking too, like they had a second source agreement with IBM. So IBM would, they'd get their processors from Intel, but if the demand ever spiked, they could also get x86 chips from AMD. And Intel went to IBM and said, hey, if you go to AMD, we're gonna get rid of your rebates. We're gonna jack up your prices.
Yep.
And so even though they had this monumental agreement that was so significant when it was signed, they never, according to Kevin, they never shipped anything to IBM because Intel just bullied them right out of that opportunity. So
which I think was a shocking moment for Intel realizing, wait a second, we can bully around IBM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Holy crap. Let's see what else we can do.
AMD has never
And they
been in
did.
an IBM system. That's
No.
There you go.
So, well, this is good timing. Another Intel security vulnerability.
Okay, yeah. They asked us not to talk about this, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yes, they paid us, but not enough. So Jeremy,
bounce now.
I might have been tormenting one of the people we weren't just talking about in the chat as well on this.
Well,
but yeah, so Intel software guard extensions are a thing you probably don't use. They are great if you happen to be running an AWS server or have Azure going. And the idea is that these are baked into the silicon they're actually a side chip on the same substrate. But the idea is that even if someone gets a hold of admin credentials, they should not be able to make any irreversible changes to your operating system. Unfortunately, just like cable cards back in the good old days, if you undervolt them, you can flip bits to the point where all of a sudden you are now sitting in what should be an invulnerable and secure place, which is the SGX. And although you can't really modify anything at this point, although that's not to say it's not theoretically impossible, it does allow you, if you're sitting on the same network section or at least in between the machine and an exit point, to be able to feed in certain bits of code into the TCP/IP stream to direct them to a page of your choice, like say maybe their favorite banking site, except not quite. So it's a little bit worrisome. It was, as is tradition, announced after the patch was made available. There are a bunch of BIOS patches which are available on Intel and are being easily... It's not so much microcode. One of them is a bit of a firmware one, but it's not as dangerous as some of the ones that we've seen. And it's not going to have the same impact as some of the Meltdown Inspector patches that we've seen. In this case, it's just making it so that if it'll probably address an improperly low voltage and not start throwing out errors, but instead just stop and say, you know, naughty, let's not do that. I don't want to be touched there. So not horrible, but a great name, because you gotta like Plundervolt.
Confusing with some other product names, other brand names.
Yeah, it's not a connection interface. It's a vDroop vulnerability exploit.
Sort of
thing.
Not exactly. It's not the same as vDroop.
Yeah.
Yell at me if you want, but it was a good joke.
All right, and we mentioned this. I think it was last week. There's a game that Jeremy was very much looking forward to, MechWarrior 5, but apparently launch has not gone well.
I'm more than a little bit pissed off at this. Now, I will start out with the full disclosure of it's been a hell of a lot of time since I have played a mech game, and my joystick muscles are a little bit, out of shape. And to be honest, my 14-year-old Logitech 3D Pro Extreme might need a little bit of cleaning. That said, that may explain how I'm not doing so well. It doesn't explain why every time I want, because you switch between driving your mech and then walking around in your drop ship in between missions. So if you click invert mouse, it inverts the joystick. And you tell it to not invert the y-axis on the joystick, it turns it off on the mouse. There are a shitload of controls which are simply not mappable to a joystick or a HOTAS. They're just not on the frickin' list. If you do anything other than windowed full screen with a multi-monitor setup, you are now full screened on one monitor and unable to interface with anything except doing it. They did the most wonderful thing, which is that all of your save games and the INIs that you want to fix are dumped under App Data Local, because that's where you look first for editing INIs. It's nice. Oh, and every once in a while, I'll just be piloting the mech and I'll hit escape because I got to go do something and come back. And all of a sudden, the sensitivity of every single axis of my joystick has been set to 0. Up to and including the throttle. So it doesn't matter how hard you push in any direction, nothing happens whatsoever. I think it's pissy because it shows off in the tutorial when you're trying to do it. It's like, push this button to move forward. So you walk around a bit for the joystick, and it sits there patiently waiting for you to push the button it instructed you to push. So for a PC-only game, it strikes me as having a serious case of consolitis. And this isn't even going into the, we've got big monitors. You can give us more information than just the basics that you would be expecting to be interfacing with a console on your Xbone. It's patchable. And to be honest, Piranha has addressed some of these concerns by, for instance, telling everyone, oh no, you look under App Data Local, that's where we put your stuff. And some rough guides on how to map some of the commands to your joystick buttons, because in my case, I've probably got 14 buttons all told, but if you've got a proper HOTAS layout, you're several dozen, with bells and toggles and whistles and all the fun stuff. And at this point, I have no idea about foot pedals. I really do not know if you could actually make them work or not. So I was really looking forward to it, and I'm just sort of a little bit frustrated in how they developed it and put it together. There's some major bugs that are probably fixable with a couple of patches and a little bit of the overview, but as far as the game goes, it's fun. You don't feel like you're in a 3D first-person shooter. You feel like you are piloting a giant Earth mech. And there's different weapon loadouts, and you can choose different weapon chains so that you're only firing some of your stuff at a certain time. So that's fun. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I'm a wee bit disappointed in how they developed it, because obviously they're looking at porting it to the Switch soon. But it'd be nice, guys, if it's a PC first launch, make the console people suffer. I'm still not bitter about Red Dead Redemption because, well, that was console first.
Quite console first, yeah.
And quite frustrating for me to play.
Well, speaking of mechs, is there something walking around outside your building? We're getting some like low frequency rumble through your.
I think my neighbor his kid has decided to come home and use the sound bar up there.
Oh God. Okay. All right.
Because there is definitely thump, 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 thump.
Well, Christmas is coming up. Get him an isolator pad for a subwoofer.
I think I might.
Well, and as you talked about, consoles ruining it for the rest of us on PC, but it looks like some interesting stuff coming from Microsoft. Now, we know that they've been talking about their next big Xbox, the codename Project Scarlet, and at the Game Awards show just this evening, just a few hours ago, they came out and revealed the hardware. Phil Spencer was on stage there, and see if I can get this going. They revealed what the presumably the final hardware will be, and it's probably the most unusual console design we've seen ever. It's like a square form factor, but a tall tower. And
so Silverstone had a lot of overstock.
It was Silverstone, NZXT. There's a number of companies who've had products either out or coming up in this form factor. So very interesting, and of course, also they've given it an official name. If you thought that the nonsense of the X's and S's and all that was going away, sorry, this will be the Xbox Series X. And I guess that's going to be the most powerful model. I don't know how they're going to deal with presumably the less powerful
But if it's run by Cyrix, how can it be that powerful?
Sure. Well, this was an S, not a C. But
it's not Xbox Cyrix.
But yeah, it's a very it's an interesting looking design. We knew that they lost out in the performance battle last generation, but at the initial Xbox launch, they lost to the PS4 on performance. That was a big black eye. It resulted in the firing of Don Matrick, the Xbox chief at that point. And then Phil came in here, and he's, I think, done an incredible job based on what he was given, kind of doing what he could with this architecture. And so now that we're about to launch the next major revision of these consoles, it's pretty clear they do not want to lose on performance next time. Both this and the PS5 will be based on the same basic AMD architecture, but they talked about doing custom vapor cooling and NVMe SSDs potentially, and some things to really maximize performance there. So interesting. We'll see how this all shakes out as more information comes out. It's not shipping till holiday 2020, and even though it is an unusual form factor, you can see in the pictures here, if you look at it, there's a controller next to it, so it's not super tall. It's not as tall as a ATX size PC case. A little bit shorter,
yeah,
but
it's like a mini case. It's a little bit.
Yeah, it would be like a mini ITX kind of style build.
Yeah.
And I'm
almost
sure
like it's a PC,
Yeah, almost. I'm sure we'll see cases come out that are nearly identical in design, and you can build your own Xbox killer PC. All right, do you guys want? We don't have it in the show notes. Did you want to talk at all about the Mac Pro? Because I saw some people talking about it in the chat.
Talked about it on Twitch a little bit today, and it's. Go ahead. You can go ahead, Jeremy.
To be perfectly honest, because I am going to mock it mercilessly for a while. If you are looking for an insanely powerful workstation and are used to paying $70,000-$80,000 to Dell or Cray or someone, it's actually a good deal at $50K. If you're anyone who has never shopped for $100,000 system and bargain them down to $70,000 or $80,000, then I will laugh at you for looking at it. Because when you pump everything up and you buy the wheels are a $4,000 extra, by the way, because Apple, you are happily over $50K
For $400.
Yeah, oh, sorry, 400.
Yes.
How dare I?
They're nuts. They're not that nuts.
But literally, if that's the kind of thing that you do, and you need to upscale and process 4K video to 8K video in faster than real time, well, this will do it for you. If you have no idea what I just said, well, then don't even buy the $5,000 model, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Hey, I was looking at server supply today, and those DIMMs, because that's 2933. I don't know what the cast latency is, but the highest cast latency 2933 at server supply was $1,500 a stick for the 128 gigabyte sticks. So there's 12 of them, right? Is it 12 in the highest configuration?
Yeah, up to 12.
And
These are
they're
removable,
charging
shockingly enough.
yeah,
Yes.
Apple's charging $25,000 for that memory upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
That's where this crazy $53,000 configuration comes from. But it would still cost you like 18 or 19,000 yourself to just buy the DIMMs. So yeah, they have a markup, and yeah, it's exacerbated over 12 DIMMs. But I will say, in their defense, they're only charging like a $5,000 or $6,000 markup on RAM, which for them, in the past, you'd expect to pay at least double for memory upgrades from Apple.
They were real bad a few years ago. They got better to the point where on some of the systems, the memory was almost retail value in terms of, or almost, go out and buy it yourself value, with the difference being you're not getting the value of the RAM that would have come in the baseline configuration. So that was
exactly.
The difference.
Yeah.
But and then they got good for a few years, and now they're starting to creep back up a little bit. The one thing you can defend this for, though, is that it is, as Jeremy said, it's modular, it's upgradable. You don't have to go with all the RAM up front. You don't have to go with their GPU. So like the GPU, the initial or the baseline GPU is a pretty pathetic considering the system, 580X, Radeon 580X, 8 gigabyte.
Which you can get in an iMac now.
You can get more than that in an iMac, I think.
What's that?
I think
if you go iMac Pro.
Yeah. But,
or do the Vega option. Yeah,
I think there's a Vega upgrade. But you go from that baseline to the next lowest option would be the Pro Vega 2, which is a much more interesting card, custom card from Apple and AMD. That's $2,400 right there for one of those. But you don't have to do that. And also, not only do you not have to do that, you don't have to use these MPX special cards. You can put your own GPUs in there. There's some headers for some PCI power cables. I think you got to buy the cables, but you can add your own GPU without having to use theirs. And storage is more limited. There's some SATA ports on the inside, and there's some products already out on the market that are giving you some upgrade options there. But the one thing is, if you don't want to put all this money into it, you can kind of do it over time. And that's something you cannot say about their other products, and like the iMac Pro, which is all, you got to buy what you need right out of the box. And unless you're willing to do a very costly, expensive disassembly of the system to potentially replace something.
The iMac Pro doesn't make any sense to me anymore. They released the iMac Pro during a time when the Mac Pro hadn't been updated since 2013. It was a joke. And they were still charging $3,000 for the base model. Or maybe it was $2,500. No, it might still be $3,000. Regardless, iMac Pro comes out, and then the next generation of 5K iMacs was faster. So it's just like, yeah, it's got Xeons and it has ECC memory, and that's about the only difference. But you could get the Core i9 9900K in the higher end 5K iMac shipping this year and be faster than the first generation of iMac Pro. So it's just, and like Jim is saying, like if you can't upgrade it, then how is this a great choice for a professional application? Like, and we're not the market for this. Like, people listening to this podcast are probably not the people who specifically seek out a Mac Pro because they are Final Cut users. So movie production studios that use Mac Pros because they use Final Cut, that don't mess around with Hackintosh or anything, and they're buying from Apple. This is a big deal because what's $6,000 when you're talking about outfitting a studio? And
well, 6,000. I mean, I would not.
The monitor.
Yeah.
I think
6,000 will get you the monitor that comes with it, and maybe the VESA mount.
Yeah. Don't clean it. Don't clean it with your own cloth. You got to use the special cloth to clean the monitor.
Yeah. This, to me, the bigger story about this is that this is the vehicle for the Afterburner card.
True.
Nothing else is using that. If you go out and price high-end capture cards for like 4K and above content, they're expensive. You can spend $1,000 for a single stream. And I don't know what the exact spec is on how many streams it can concurrently support of like ProRes coming in. But if you're able to do multi-stream and take that off of the CPU, and it's a $2,000 card, that sounds outrageous. This is a professional tool at that point. It's just like, well, this goes along with my whatever camera, and now I'm able to do multi-stream, and this is my Final Cut machine. And at that point, you're just at the mercy of whatever the budget for that production was, whether you can afford one of these workstations or not. But it's absolutely ridiculous from the standpoint of a high-end desktop for a user who could choose their own operating system. I would still love it if Apple licensed Mac OS or allowed people to install it. They didn't have it locked down the way that they do. And honestly, with every release of Mac OS, because there is an iMac in my house, like the family computer here for many years, my wife prefers Apple. We have an iMac in the upstairs that is like the family computer, and I have all the PC stuff down here. And every version of Mac OS that comes out gets more locked down, more restrictive, things are taken away. And I just think it's just sucks. Like I last used a Mac full time, I think maybe before El Capitan came out, maybe Mavericks. I used a Mac from like Tiger to maybe Snow Leopard full time. I had a MacBook Pro in the Snow Leopard era that I used. And looking at it now, like the fact that they've just made the decision you can't run 32-bit code, like no, it's just locked down. The fact that they got rid of iTunes, you're losing more and more control over your own operating system experience, almost like you're running Windows 10. So where's the huge advantage there? There's feature parity across the board between operating systems on different platforms. It really comes down to whether or not the software you want to run can run on the OS of your choice. And you can make Linux work for 99.9% of the stuff you'd ever want to do. Unfortunately, there's this behemoth called Adobe, where if you're stuck in Adobe Creative Cloud hell, where you need to use their applications, they do not support Linux, then you've got to choose either Mac or Windows. And we use Creative Cloud. A lot of people do, obviously. So either you're on the Apple only Final Cut island, or maybe you can use Adobe apps, which are cross-platform and run great on Windows. But then, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I feel a lot of anger.
It is an unusual situation. And I saw like Mac Rumors, obviously an Apple focused site. When this pricing came out, people were defending it. And I saw some people, like, as you said, if you're Final Cut, and I used to use Final Cut, I still do prefer Final Cut, but my Mac died and I'm not paying to go down that road again. So I switched to Premiere. But there were people defending it, saying, we use this, but we use Premiere or we use Avid. We use like multi tools that are available on Windows, and you're paying a lot of money. You're not getting the Afterburner benefits until and unless they add third-party support for. I mean, there's a third-party
API. You're get really good at MS Paint, mate.
Sure, or with MS Paint or 3D Paint.
Well, I mean, if you're going to go special,
yeah. But like, this is a very awkward path that Apple's going down with their restrictive operating system, with the looming threat of switching to ARM, which will further restrict things on their mobile processors and potentially low-end desktop. So we'll see. And of course, too, we have to look to see if Apple's actually going to update this. When they announced that trash can Mac Pro in 2013, and I bought one, so I was using Final Cut.
Still one running in the office today.
Yeah. Phil Schiller came out and very infamously, proudly looked at this thing and said, yeah, we can't innovate my ass, huh? Well, yeah, you can't, Phil, because it was a piece of shit that had really bad thermal management and you never upgraded it. And we're selling the same V2 Xeon and AMD D300 GPUs 6 years later. And that, I mean, they could have done something if they had continued to add additional processor options as new technologies came out, tweak the thermal cooling system. There could have been something there. So now they spent years. This was first teased over 2 years ago, and it's finally here. They've got to upgrade this thing because, again, most people probably don't need it at all, but for those who do, if they let this thing languish and we're running these Xeon W chips for 5 years, man, that would suck because there's no.
Like I say, they're still running in the office to this day.
Yeah. But anyway, let's wrap that up and jump into the picks of the week. I've got one to start off here. It's the GOG.com winter sale. Obviously, GOG, Steam, Origin, they've all got these frequent sales, but this one came out. It's running from now until January 2nd. And if you're a live viewer, I don't think this is still going to be running for the on-demand folks, but if you're watching live, head over there right now. You've got about 10 hours and 45 minutes left as of 11:30 p.m. Eastern time on the 12th. So you can get Wasteland 2 for free. You have to have an account at GOG, but you click the button, you log in, you click the button, you get an email about 2 minutes later. There's no strings attached, just like several of the other games they've given away for free. So if you're interested in that, in Wasteland, which is a Fallout inspired type, well, actually the original Wasteland inspired Fallout, and then you got Wasteland 2 here. So it's a pretty well-received game, and you can get it for free for the next 10 hours. So head over there. But then while the sale goes on until January 2nd, lots of good deals. Some of you can see certain publishers aren't discounting as much, 10%, 25%, but then there's some pretty steep discounts on some good games as well. So check that out over at GOG.com. All right, Jeremy, you've got something for us.
Yeah. If there's someone on your Christmas list that you absolutely despise or feel that stalking is amusing, get them a ring. These things are great. So not only, as you all know, there's hundreds of police departments have secretly, well, not so secretly anymore, but signed an agreement to be able to get a hold of ring data for at least a couple of months, if not in perpetuity. Well, the Verge realized that with the Neighbor app that comes with the ring, they can do the exact same thing themselves. Oh, sorry, it was Gizmodo. I take it back. But so Gizmodo did the exact same bloody thing, just as a normal user with their Neighbor app, and could essentially track just about anyone. In the vast majority of cases, the geographic data that they were given was exactly the location of the ring. In other cases, it was within the block, but seeing as how it's a video doorbell, it's not that hard to figure out which one it is and to map them all out. And then just to rub the point in, some dickhead hacked into one and convinced this poor little 8-year-old girl in Tennessee that he was Santa Claus and that she needed to destroy her room. And, well, obviously she's not going to argue with Santa. So, seriously, if you are thinking about getting one of these, don't do it for anyone you like. Do it for people you really, really don't.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
And yeah, I mean, this is the kind of the debate with privacy and with data. Theoretically, there's a good use for this kind of stuff. Like the whole public premise of the Neighbor's setup is, hey, my house got broken into. Did your camera catch anything? Or in like when you use Google Maps, it shows you real-time traffic based on other Google Maps users, and that's very handy because I've found Google Maps to be incredibly accurate about routes and timing and stuff. But when you let that data aggregate and you let someone else, whether it's a marketing company or a government or a policing body, take that data and then access it without any type of safeguards, any type of checks, it's no good. It's no good. And also, I mean, I am a little wary of I think it made like mainstream news, the hacking with the little girl in the ring. I don't know if you saw, Jeremy, did they explain how did he actually hack it, or was this yet another case where they don't change the default credentials for the account?
I believe that is the definition of hacking for Internet of Shit devices.
Okay.
Because you don't have to, and chances are they were probably essentially the spokesperson came on and said, well, you're supposed to set up a 2-factor authentication, and that way this sort of thing's less likely to happen. I think he said can't, but less likely. Yes, sure. you do change your bloody password, people, but at the same time, give it another 6 months and we'll find out that there's a hard-coded backdoor password in there that you can't change.
Yes, that is the risk.
Jeremy,
There's always
You're asking a lot of people when you
I know.
when you are of the people and you see that it's an event to remember the Wi-Fi password. They have to find the notebook they wrote it in on the shelf and go to the back page with all the pencil scrawl of all their passwords for everything. And like, okay, it's the Wi-Fi password is, and they're literally just reading off some long string that's printed on the bottom of the router that they got from their service provider, and that's never going to be changed. And whatever the default credentials are to get into that router as the admin will never be changed. And just getting their new device they got online is a big deal. Like, oh, okay, it's connected now. I can see it on my phone now. They're not going to do anything beyond that. So this stuff is never
They'll
going to get
realize
better
this is too hard for them to figure out, and they will go out and they will buy another wireless router to stick between the wireless router provided by the ISP and their own, whose password is blank or admin or default. Yep. And hey, that's much easier to remember.
Mm-hmm.
True.
I have seen it.
You're like my neighbor too, who's the hint for the password is the Wi-Fi SSID. Bengals quarterback.
Very popular.
Bengals quarterback is the SSID, and then one day I was like, wait a minute. Oh, okay.
Password Dalton, and then probably his jersey number, right?
No, it was just Dalton.
Wow. Okay.
You want him to remember the jersey number?
I know. It's too hard. It's too complicated. Anybody who's ever had to support their family knows what I'm talking about. When it's the password is literally the same thing everywhere. My wife did this for years. She had the same password for everything. And then over time, this caught up with her because, oh, what are these charges on my credit card? Somebody's buying gas at a gas station in Florida. Like, yeah, I mean, you use the same password for every website and don't have two-factor authentication enabled for anything. So, it happens.
Yeah. But I don't know what's worse, that or the inevitable time when LastPass gets hacked. And then, because I've got unique random passwords for everything, but except for that one.
Oh, trust me, Jim. I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
All of our PC per stuff, I'm like staring at it like, what character is that? Okay.
Well, I just copy paste.
I know, but I'm setting up a new system and
short,
this weird thing
graphically obscene sentences for your passwords.
Yeah. Speaking of graphically obscene, apparently there's a penis fish infestation in California, according to the New York Post.
I could have chosen a lot of sites to link to the Santa Claus story. I chose this one.
This is why. Yeah, because of the quality of the post.
The juxtaposition is wonderful too, because the blow up doll surgery is also just amusing.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. Apparently this is called a fat innkeeper worm. It's a bird. It's
Sadly,
a plane.
They outcrap the Guardian, which is not easy to do.
Yeah. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's a penis fish.
Yeah.
Now, for our audio listeners, Jim, will you describe? No, please don't. Please don't.
It's apparently a fish that looks like that has a very phallic shape to it.
No, it's an innkeeper worm. Just Google innkeeper worm and
don't. If you value your site, do not do this.
Or just head to Southern California and hang out on the beach for a few hours. Apparently, they're washing up by the thousands. For more information, check out the New York Post, the authority on dedicated, in-depth journalism.
Mm-hmm. And snarky sports coverage for the Yankees and Mets.
Yeah.
And
I guess they do actually do one thing good.
All right, Sebastian, what have you got?
Okay, if I can remember, there's a site that does video game music rips, like they host the rips. And this isn't just like MP3 files of game music. This is like files that you need a special piece of software to play because they're original, like OPL3 music or stuff from Sega Genesis games, and stuff from DOS games, PC-88 from Japan. There's some just fantastic music out there that you can go out and listen to on YouTube, of course, or download some of the MP3s that exist. But there's a level of quality and accuracy to the original consoles and systems that is pretty staggering with this latest release of the VGM player, and that was my real pick this week, not VGM rips, because that's where you go and get a lot of really good quality source files for this music. But VGM Play is a command line program, and there's also a plugin available. You can get the plugin version of it to use in, I think it's compatible with FooBar. I know it's compatible with a couple of different media players, but the standalone VGM Play application it just runs in a command line. I it works just fine with Windows 10. All I did was I made a folder of all the VGM rips I've been downloading, and I have the VGM player. I just made that the default playback for any of these files. So now if I just download like the soundtrack to Sylpheed from PC88, double click on the file, it's playing, and you actually get interesting information in the command window. It tells you what the actual OPL chip was, which Yamaha chip it was programmed to use, that's being emulated, and if there's a loop point in the file that was original to the game, that sort of thing. So it's all free. It's fascinating, and hearing music like the Sylpheed soundtrack that I just mentioned, it's just amazing. It's like the very best of that Sega Genesis era of OPL3 music. It's stereo. It's got a lot of different things going on. It's tuneful. So if you're interested in video game music at all, especially the Yamaha chip stuff, like the OPL stuff, this does just a phenomenal job. It's using the absolute newest version of the OPL synthesis, which I think has actually been out since about last December. That's in like forks of DOSBox, and we've gotten all the way to the point now where I'm satisfied that this is as good as it's probably ever going to get. It certainly sounds source accurate. So you can be nuts like I am and spend money on vintage hardware. I have a pretty significant sound card collection at this point. Or you can use something like this and like, well, damn, it sounds better because I'm getting a clean digital signal and using modern equipment to play it back. But check it out.
All right, so that's VGM Play. We'll have the links to that and all of the picks, especially the penis fish, in the show notes.
Yes.
Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining us. Like I said at the beginning of the show, we do this every Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern. If you want to be notified when we go live, head over to pcpro.com/subscribe. You can join our mailing list. We send out an email in about an hour or so before each show. I was a little late today. Apologize to Mirror
I believe
PPC.
it came at about 18 or 19 past the hour, if I'm not.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So it rolls out over, it takes, the way we've got it set up, it takes a few minutes to send to everybody. But normally we give you a heads up about an hour or so. And that's, again, that's pcpro.com/subscribe. And of course, pcpro.com for all the articles and reviews and charts and tables and pictures, all the great photography that Sebastian does every week. Well, thanks again for joining us. We hope everyone has a great week. We'll be back next week. We'll have a show for sure next week. And then the week after, of course, I think is Christmas. So we probably will not have anything for you, at least anything live that week. But again, pcpro.com/subscribe, and we'll be sure to let you know exactly what's going on. But we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.